Millionaire spends his birthday alone in a cafe until a single mother asks to stay with him. The relentless Madrid rain poured down, merciless and cold. The slippery cobblestones reflected pale yellow lights, shimmering like endless tears. Among the rushing crowd, a frail young woman in a worn coat clutched her little girl tightly against her chest. Isabella Cruz was used to the biting chill, but her heart still clenched when she saw Clara's purple lips and trembling hands. "Just a place to wait out the rain, my love," Isabella whispered, her voice trembling as she fought to hide her despair. Clara looked up, her eyes clear yet weary, as if begging her mother to work a miracle. She was only 6, but her gaze already carried burdens no child should bear. They stopped in front of a luxurious cafe on the corner. Through the wide glass window spilled warm golden light and the faint scent of pastries. Inside, men in tailored suits and elegant women laughed easily as though the storm outside belonged to another world. In a quiet corner near the window, a man sat alone. The wheelchair beneath his strong frame radiated silent authority. His eyes were cold, proud, and lonely. This was Gabriel Montoya, founder of a leading tech empire, a man both admired and feared in Madrid. Isabella hesitated. She hated to intrude, hated even more the thought of being looked down upon. But Clara's soft cough forced her to swallow her pride. She stepped toward Gabriel's table, bowing her head politely. "Excuse me, may my daughter and I sit here for a moment? Just until the rain eases." Gabriel raised his eyes, sharp as blades. He glanced past Isabella, stopping at Clara. For an instant his gaze wavered, but quickly returned to indifference. "This isn't a shelter," he said curtly, his deep voice carrying the weight of dismissal. Isabella swallowed hard. "We'll leave the moment the rain stops. I promise." Gabriel pulled out a sleek leather wallet, sliding a thick bundle of cash across the table. His tone was flat, almost cruel. "Take this and get the girl a room." Isabella's tears spilled freely as she shook her head. "I didn't come here to beg for charity, sir. I only wanted a little kindness, a breath of warmth for my child. That's all." Her voice rang with unexpected strength. Gabriel froze. No one had ever refused his money. To him, money was universal, an answer to everything. His assistant stepped forward, ready to intervene, but suddenly Clara slipped from her mother's arms and ran straight toward Gabriel's birthday cake. The child's round eyes lit up. She wasn't afraid of the wheelchair, didn't see power or wealth, only the sweet world of chocolate and cream. She pointed at a sugar flower on the cake, a 5-petal blue blossom, and exclaimed, "Mommy, look! It's just like the one I embroidered at school." Gabriel stiffened. In a flash, an old image pierced through, the faded cloth with a blue flower, and Anna's laughter, the woman he had once loved with all his youth. She had left him, leaving a wound that never healed. He turned away, hiding his turmoil, but his frozen heart had begun to stir. Isabella recognized that fragile thread. She gambled everything. "My daughter has a fever. Please, just 5 minutes until the rain eases. Then we'll go. We'll never trouble you again." Gabriel's chest rose sharply. His eyes flickered between cold reason and an awakening tenderness. At last he muttered, "Stay. Bring them something hot to drink." Both Isabella and the assistant stared in shock. The assistant's jaw tightened, fury blazing in his eyes, but he obeyed nonetheless. Clara let out a delighted squeal as she accepted the cup of hot chocolate, sipping with a bright smile. Gabriel watched in silence. The child's innocent laughter pierced the fortress he had built around himself, each note cutting deeper than any blade. The rain outside kept pouring down in torrents. The sound of it drumming on the cafe's glass roof only deepened the tense silence at the table where Gabriel and Isabella sat with her daughter. A solitary candle still flickered weakly on the birthday cake before Gabriel, its small flame a fragile contrast to the frozen coldness of his face. Around them, the cafe buzzed with cheerful laughter and chatter, but at that table by the terrace, the world seemed suspended in stillness. Clara, her eyes shining, tugged gently at her mother's hand before looking up at Gabriel. Tilting her head, she asked with innocent curiosity, "Today, is it your birthday, sir?" Gabriel stiffened. It had been so long since anyone had asked him that question with such pure, guileless wonder. He looked at the little girl and met eyes free of judgment, filled only with childlike sincerity. A strange feeling stirred within his chest, both warm and painfully tender. Clara didn't wait for an answer. Smiling, she began to sing softly, "Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you." Isabella froze, her cheeks flushing as she whispered in embarrassment, "Clara, don't!" But Gabriel raised a hand to stop her. The awkward little song rose into the damp, cold air like a fragile beam of light, piercing the heavy walls of darkness around him. When the song ended, Clara pursed her lips, took a big breath, and blew out the candle. Silence fell over the table, broken only by the girl's sudden burst of giggles. Gabriel watched her for a long moment, and then, for the first time in years, his lips curved into a faint smile. Slowly, he cut a slice of cake, placed it on a porcelain plate, and slid it toward Clara. "This is for you," he said quietly. "Thank you, sir." Clara cheered, her tiny hands wrapping eagerly around the plate as she carefully spooned bite after bite. She ate with delight, her eyes glowing with happiness as though she had never tasted anything so wonderful. Isabella's throat tightened as she watched her daughter. She could not remember the last time Clara had a proper piece of cake. Gabriel observed in silence. The sight of the child stirred memories of what he had long buried, of pieces of himself he thought were gone forever. For a fleeting moment, the cold, empty table no longer felt desolate. When Clara was nearly finished, Gabriel finally spoke, his deep voice steady, but laden with weight. "You and the girl, where do you live?" Isabella froze, her heart tightening. That simple question cut like a blade into the shame she had tried so hard to conceal. After a moment of silence, she bowed her head, her trembling hand clutching Clara's. "We have nowhere. I lost my job and then our home. Now we just wander." Gabriel's eyes darkened as he glanced at the empty plate before Clara. Slowly, a decision took shape within him, sharp and final. "I won't give you money." His voice was dry. Isabella flinched, lifting her gaze to meet his, but then he continued, "But if what you need is a roof, you and the girl may come to my estate. You will work there. In return, you will both have shelter and proper food." Isabella stood stunned. Clara, still carefree, licked her spoon, unaware that both their destinies had just shifted. In that instant, pride rose in Isabella, urging her to refuse, but when she saw the innocent smile still lingering on her daughter's lips, her pride shattered like glass. "For my daughter's sake," Isabella whispered, her eyes brimming red, "I accept." And so, just a few hours later, Gabriel's luxurious car carried Isabella and Clara away from the little cafe, gliding through the rain toward the Montoya estate, a place where a new door of fate was waiting to be opened. The elegant car rolled slowly along the cobblestone road leading to the Montoya mansion. On either side, towering trees arched their branches together like a green canopy, with the last rays of the afternoon sun slipping through the leaves, casting shimmering patterns of light onto the path. Clara pressed her face against the window as if stepping into a world that only existed in fairy tales. She squeezed her mother's hand, her little heart caught between excitement and the timid awe of such unfamiliar luxury. Isabella, sitting beside her daughter, felt something very different. To her, each wrought-iron gate with intricate designs, each ivy-covered wall, was not a symbol of freedom, but rather of a gilded cage. Beautiful, dazzling, yet something about it pierced her heart, like a forewarning of the trials that awaited. When the car stopped before the marble steps, a middle-aged woman, the housekeeper Rose, was already waiting, her calm posture and warm eyes far gentler than Isabella had expected. Rose bowed politely, then guided mother and daughter through the grand hall. The ceiling soared high above, crystal chandeliers spilling soft light that glimmered against the polished stone floor. They followed Rose up the sweeping staircase, along a hallway draped with thick red carpet, until a wooden door creaked open. Inside was a bright, tidy room with pristine white sheets and a window that opened to a lush green garden in the distance. Clara darted forward, her round eyes gleaming like little pearls. "Mommy, are we really going to live here now?" The innocent question rang out like a pure note amid the overwhelming grandeur. Isabella pulled her daughter close, holding her tightly as she drew in a deep breath. Isabella and Clara's new life began in the Montoya estate. The mansion was vast, luxurious to the point of being overwhelming, yet it lacked the breath of human warmth. To Isabella, it felt more like a temporary lodging on her journey of survival. But to Clara, everything was new, fascinating, and full of wonder. During the day, Isabella threw herself into the tasks she was given, cleaning, doing laundry, washing dishes. Clara, not allowed to go to school, trailed after her mother all day long. The little girl never complained. On the contrary, she always tried to help in her own way. When Isabella bent down to scrub the floor, Clara grabbed a rag as well, sticking her bottom up and imitating her mother, scrubbing clumsily but with determination. Every so often, she looked up and grinned. "I'm helping you, Mommy." Isabella laughed, reaching out to ruffle her daughter's soft hair. In those moments, all her fatigue seemed to melt away. When Isabella washed dishes in the kitchen, Clara stood by her side, serious like a little old lady. "You're doing so well, Mommy. You wash faster than a superhero." Those clumsy little words of encouragement often brought tears to Isabella's eyes. What she didn't know was that all of these moments were being noticed by Gabriel. From the upstairs window, from a quiet hallway, he watched them silently. At first, Gabriel observed with detached curiosity. But the more he looked, the more he realized he was paying too much attention to the two of them. In Isabella's smile there was a quiet resilience, and in Clara's eyes a light he thought had vanished forever. One afternoon, as the sun cast golden light over the garden, Clara wandered into Gabriel's vast library. The room was quiet, filled with the scent of old wood and paper. Gabriel sat at his desk, his wheelchair positioned close to the shelves. The girl stood in the doorway, watching him for a long while. Then suddenly, with childlike innocence, Clara tilted her head and said, "I think your legs are just sleeping. My mommy says if something sleeps too long, you have to wake it up really gently." Gabriel froze. For a fleeting moment, he almost laughed, a reaction so foreign to him now. But he held it back, turning his face away to hide the strange spark stirring in his chest. Clara paid no mind to his silence. Her bright eyes roamed the room, stopping at the towering bookshelves. Then she exclaimed, "Sir, could you lend me a piece of paper and some colored pencils? It's been so long since I got to draw." Gabriel frowned slightly. He wasn't used to such innocent requests. But when his eyes met her eager gaze, his hand almost instinctively opened a drawer, pulling out a stack of blank paper and a box of colored pencils, long unused. "Fine. But don't make a mess of my desk," he said, his voice striving to remain cold. Clara beamed, clutching the paper tightly, then sat right down on the chair opposite him, beginning to scribble away. Slowly, childish lines formed into the shape of a small house, a mother, a child, and a man in a wheelchair. Gabriel unconsciously stopped working, his eyes lingering on her. In that innocent drawing, he felt a stirring he could hardly name, as though the little girl was gently knocking on a room in his heart that he had locked away long ago. From then on, Clara had her own little corner in the living room, where she drew dragons, mermaids, and a man in a wheelchair with wings sprouting from his back. "This is you flying to the magic world," she explained seriously. Gabriel looked at the drawing, then let out a laugh. A deep, rough laugh, real and unexpected. Isabella glanced over from the kitchen, and in that fleeting moment, she knew that something had changed. That late afternoon, the Montoya estate echoed with Gabriel's furious roar. Isabella, folding clothes in the kitchen, heard every word clearly. "I told you already. I don't need therapy. Get out now." The door slammed so hard that Clara startled and dropped her spoon. Isabella gathered her daughter into her arms, soothing her, though her own heart tightened. When she stepped into the hallway, she caught sight of the therapist hastily packing his tools, his face heavy with defeat, walking away under the icy gaze of Mrs. Delgado. Isabella understood. Gabriel had once again rejected every hand extended toward him, and for some reason that pierced her heart. That night, after Clara had fallen asleep, Isabella prepared a cup of hot tea and gently knocked on the study door. Gabriel sat alone under the yellow lamp, his shadow stretched long across the wall, smoke curling in the air before him. She stepped inside, her voice soft. "Excuse me, I brought you some tea." Gabriel frowned slightly, but when he met her calm gaze, he merely nodded. Isabella set the cup down on the desk, the scent of mint gently spreading, and after a moment of hesitation, she said, "I heard what happened with the doctor earlier today." Gabriel's eyes flashed cold, his voice sharp as a blade. "Do you want to lecture me too?" Isabella shook her head, her lips trembling but her tone steady. "No, I only want to say, if you'll allow me, I can help." Gabriel let out a brief laugh, leaning toward mockery. "You? A maid? You think you're better than a doctor?" Isabella drew in a deep breath, her eyes clouded with old memories. "My mother was paralyzed once. I learned rehabilitation to take care of her. I know how to massage, how to keep the muscles from wasting away. I'm not a doctor, but I can be patient. If you agree, I want to try." The room sank into silence. Gabriel stared at her for a long time, as if trying to strip away layers to find any hidden lie. But all he saw was sincerity, and a quiet pain that mirrored his own. At last he exhaled, his voice breaking slightly. "You are strange, Isabella. Aren't you afraid of me?" She smiled faintly, her eyes shining under the lamp. "I don't see anything to fear. All I see is a man in pain." Gabriel trembled briefly under her gaze, quickly turning away, but inside, a thin layer of ice had begun to melt. From that day on, Isabella took on a new, silent duty. Each morning, she set his medicine beside the black coffee Gabriel always drank. In the afternoons, under sunlight slanting through the large windows, she sat quietly beside him, her gentle hands massaging the legs that seemed fated to slumber forever. At first, Gabriel tensed in resistance, but gradually he realized that from her hands radiated a warmth that dispelled the chill clinging to him for years. Many times he caught Isabella bowing her head in concentration, beads of sweat on her forehead, and in those fleeting moments a strange light flickered in his eyes, a light meant only for her. One afternoon his voice broke the silence, almost a whisper. "You are very patient." Isabella looked up, smiling. "Because I believe whatever sleeps too long can always be awakened. Your legs are no different." Gabriel froze, staring at her, his eyes no longer cold, but filled with astonishment, fragility, and a nameless feeling quietly stirring to life within him. Clara sat beside Gabriel during the physical therapy sessions, whispering encouragements as if casting a spell. "Come on, Uncle Gabriel, you can do it. Every time you lift your leg, you level up." She even created a medal system out of colored paper. Each time Gabriel completed an exercise, she secretly stuck a star on the table next to his bed. Gabriel never mentioned it, but he always smiled when he saw it. One afternoon, while Isabella was doing laundry, Clara sat on the floor pretending to be a massage expert. Her tiny hands moved gently along Gabriel's legs. "My mommy does it like this. I want to try." Gabriel, who once hated being touched, simply sat still. No flinching, no pulling away, just quietly watching the little girl with softened eyes. When Isabella returned and saw the scene, she froze. But Gabriel only said, "The girl has her own way." The atmosphere in the house began to shift, little by little. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was filled with the sound of crayons scraping across paper, bedtime stories, and at times the deep, warm laughter of Gabriel breaking through the quiet. Three people, three different worlds, slowly began to intertwine. No labels, no promises, just closeness. One evening, as Isabella was tidying up, Clara leaned close and whispered, "Mommy, before we came here, Uncle Gabriel was really sad, wasn't he?" Isabella paused, looking at her daughter. "Yes, darling." Clara nodded, then smiled. "Then we're in the right place." One morning, as Isabella let drops of peppermint oil fall into her palms and gently massaged along Gabriel's calves, she suddenly felt a faint twitch, so slight it seemed like an illusion. Her whole body froze, her heartbeat racing. Looking up at him with trembling eyes, she whispered, "Did you feel that?" Gabriel didn't answer right away. He remained silent for a long time, his gaze sliding down to the legs that seemed sealed in darkness. At last he nodded, slowly, as though afraid he was mistaken. "Yes, like a faint tingling, very slight, but real." A smile spread across Isabella's lips, not a polite mask, not one to hide her constant anxiety. It was a smile carrying a spark, a hope she could almost touch. From that moment on, Isabella changed her approach to therapy. She no longer followed rigid routines. She trusted her intuition, warm compresses in the evening, adjusting her touch to match Gabriel's breathing, playing soft music to ease his tension. And above all, she let Clara be part of the journey. Clara became an adorable little junior therapist. She invented a game called Wake Up the Legs. Each morning, she placed a tiny bell near Gabriel's foot, ringing it softly every time Isabella massaged. "If you hear enough bells, your legs will wake up," Clara said with a mix of seriousness and innocence. Gabriel laughed, a rare laugh that softened the harsh lines etched into his face. From then on, he no longer counted the minutes until Isabella left. Instead, he began to ask, "What will we practice today?" He ate with more appetite, slept more deeply. The long nights no longer echoed with restless sighs, but with dreams, sometimes filled with Clara's ringing laughter, sometimes with visions of himself walking under the sun. One afternoon, while practicing leg flexes, Gabriel whispered, "I feel something moving, very faintly." Isabella didn't let her excitement burst out. She only took his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Then, it's beginning. Each small victory was marked by Clara with a paper star pasted on the wall, not as a prize, but as a reminder. You're moving toward the light. And indeed, Gabriel was no longer a man drowning in darkness. He asked Isabella to open every curtain, letting sunlight flood the room. In his eyes now, something had changed. No longer the distant look of master and servant, but a tender, lingering gaze meant for the two people who truly mattered in his life. One morning, as Isabella helped him sit up, Gabriel suddenly asked, his deep voice warm yet tinged with unease, If one day I walk again, do you think everything will change? Isabella paused, her deep eyes meeting his. She didn't smile. She simply answered softly, I think everything has already changed, not because you'll walk again, but because you've begun to live again. Time passed, and the once cold house now glowed with warmth, not only because sunlight streamed through the windows, but because of the vibrant presence of Isabella and Clara. But just as Gabriel's heart was beginning to open, a figure from the past returned, bringing with it wounds that had never healed. That afternoon, as the rain drizzled down, Gabriel sat in his study, while Isabella was guiding Clara in writing letters at the small kitchen table. The sound of the gate bell rang out. Rosa entered, her voice filled with excitement. "Sir, there is a visitor. She says her name is Adriana." Isabella froze for a moment. The name meant nothing to her, but the flicker of unease in Rosa's eyes and Gabriel's unusual silence were more than enough to signal its weight. Gabriel looked up, his usually calm face suddenly stiffening. After a few seconds, he gave the order. "Bring her in." The woman walked into the living room in an elegant dress, her movements graceful. Time had left its trace at the corners of her eyes, but her old allure remained intact. Isabella gripped Clara's hand and stepped back, instinctively wanting to avoid the strange air that had swept into the room. "Gabriel!" The woman's voice trembled, carrying both shyness and longing. "I've come back." The air grew thick. Gabriel stayed silent, his deep eyes revealing nothing. But inside his chest, old memories surged, golden afternoons, the embroidered blue flower scarf, the promise of never leaving. And then, betrayal. Adriana stepped forward, her eyes glistening. "I know, I was wrong back then. I chose the safer path and left you behind. But now I've paid the price. I have nothing, Gabriel. Nothing but you." From a distance, Isabella's heart stirred uneasily. She didn't fully understand the story, but the tension in the room made her pulse quicken. Clara clung tightly to her mother's hand, whispering, "Mommy, why isn't Uncle Gabriel saying anything?" Gabriel sat unmoving, his hand gripping the armrest of his wheelchair. It had been so long since he'd faced Adriana, and now her presence cut into his old wound like a blade. At last, his deep, hoarse voice broke the silence. "Why have you come back, Adriana?" "To ask for a chance." Tears streamed down the woman's cheeks. "You are still in my heart. We can start over." Isabella lowered her gaze, avoiding their eyes, but her chest tightened painfully. She didn't know why it suddenly felt so hard to breathe upon hearing those words. For an instant, she wanted to scoop Clara up and flee far from this mansion. Gabriel studied Adriana for a long time. In his eyes there was memory, anger, and a trace of desire that once had been. But then his gaze shifted toward Isabella, standing in the corner, clutching her daughter tightly. Their eyes met briefly, and Gabriel realized that her presence had become an irreplaceable part of his recent days. Gabriel drew in a deep breath, and then he did something Isabella had never witnessed before, something even he wasn't sure he could do. He pressed his hands against the armrests of the chair, channeled all his strength into the muscles that had only just begun to respond, and stood, unsteady but upright, imperfect but undeniable. "When I lost the ability to walk, where were you?" Gabriel's voice was hoarse yet resolute, each word cutting like a blade. "You left with your lover, even as I begged, so now, what right do you have to ask me for forgiveness?" Isabella rushed forward, her arms instinctively steadying him as his legs trembled. But Gabriel's gaze did not waver, fixed like steel on the woman before him. Adriana. Adriana trembled, yet tried to keep her voice proud. "Is it because of her? You're rejecting me. Because of her, aren't you? I've heard the servants talk. You picked her up off the streets, and now you smile more whenever she's around." Isabella stiffened, gripping Gabriel's arm as if to reassure him, but he didn't let Adriana speak another word. "Get out of my life." His voice was like ice without a crack of weakness. "And never again dare insult the one who has always stood by me. Get out!" The words fell like a final verdict, extinguishing the last ember of the past. Isabella looked up at him, the man who had once sat motionless in darkness, now standing on sheer willpower, shielding her as though she were something beyond price. Clara leapt up and ran to grasp Gabriel's hand. Her tiny fingers trembled, but her eyes shone with resolve, as if speaking for him without words. Adriana froze, her chest heaving, but she could not utter a single word. And for the first time, she saw the undeniable truth. She had lost him completely. When the door closed behind Adriana, the echo rang in the stillness like a full stop. Gabriel sank back into his chair, his breath ragged, sweat beading on his forehead. Isabella hurried to him, her hand resting on his shoulder, warm and gentle. "Are you all right?" Gabriel let out a short laugh, a sound mingled with fatigue and release. "I've never felt this strong in my life." That night, few words were spoken. Isabella quietly brewed tea. Clara sat at the table, bent over a drawing of Gabriel standing tall, beside a shining star. They sat together in silence, only warmth spreading through the peaceful stillness. And somewhere in that moment, perhaps everything had already changed. From the day Adriana left, nothing more had to be hidden. Gabriel no longer avoided Isabella's gaze, nor did he flinch at Clara's sudden embraces. Meals for the three of them became routine. In his work, Isabella still called him Mr. Hale, but outside of those hours, the way she looked at him had shifted, and the way he looked at her was no longer the same. They did not rush, neither spoke the word love, neither gave a name to what was growing in their hearts. Yet everything they shared, the gentle touches, the silent glances, the evenings spent together under the dim lamp, carried a sacred meaning beyond any definition. Clara remained the tender bridge between them. She continued to add paper stars for each small step Gabriel made. And one day, when he managed to walk 3 steps without the frame, Clara shouted with delight, her eyes glowing, "Uncle Gabriel is about to become a superhero!" Isabella laughed, and Gabriel couldn't hold back his own laughter. In that laughter was more than joy. It carried release, a silent promise, a declaration that needed no words. We are truly alive. One evening, after Clara had been lulled to sleep, Gabriel and Isabella sat together on the porch. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of wild grass after the rain. Isabella draped a shawl over his shoulders before sitting down beside him. Gabriel looked at her directly. "I don't know how to say this, but if you agree, I want this to be forever." Isabella didn't answer right away. She simply took his hand, the hand that had once been cold with despair, now slowly warming again. "I think it began a long time ago." The next morning, Clara skipped around the house, declaring to her imaginary kingdom, "Mommy and Uncle Gabriel are getting married. Everyone has to dress really fancy." Gabriel chuckled. Isabella blushed, but neither of them denied it. Because what they had was not just love, it was a family. They didn't hold a lavish wedding. No designer gown, no grand church, no glittering bridesmaids. Only a gentle sunny afternoon in the backyard, a few close friends, wildflowers picked from the woods, and a checkered tablecloth spread over a folding table. But in that place, they had everything they needed to begin something eternal. Gabriel sat in a wooden chair beneath the maple tree, sunlight filtering through the leaves, falling softly across his shoulders. Isabella stepped out of the house in a simple white dress, her hair tied with a pale blue ribbon. Plain, yet strikingly graceful. Clara was the only bridesmaid, dressed in a light pink dress like a princess, carrying a bouquet she had gathered herself. Each of her steps on the grass came with a peal of pure laughter. Isabella came to Gabriel's side. He looked up at her, his eyes shining as though he was seeing the most beautiful thing in his life. Not Isabella in a wedding dress, but Isabella, the woman who had walked beside him through his darkest days. "There was a time I thought no one could ever love a man like me again," Gabriel whispered, his voice trembling. Isabella squeezed his hand, smiling. "I don't love a man like you. I love you." The officiant was an elderly neighbor, the same woman who had once brought Isabella banana bread when she first moved in. Her voice was deep and warm as she read the vows from the old book she always used for such special occasions. When Gabriel and Isabella exchanged rings, Clara shouted joyfully, "They're married! We're officially a family!" Gabriel laughed, pulling Isabella and Clara into his arms. The three held each other tightly as applause rang out around them. No tuxedo, no glittering lights, but every cheer was sincere. That night Isabella sat on the garden bench, her head resting on Gabriel's shoulder. Clara slept soundly in their arms after a day overflowing with joy. A cool breeze drifted by, carrying the scent of mint from the corner of the garden. Gabriel whispered, "Thank you for being brave enough to love me."